All right, so in your 2001 book, Singing My China Stories to the World.
No, 2021 book.
Oh, sorry. Let me try that again. All right, in your 2021 book, Singing My China Stories to the World, you mentioned coming to China for a year and deciding to stay. Could you walk us through that decision?
To stay?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, why did you come to China, why did you stay?
Well, many of my colleagues or comrades who I was working with somebody first had an opportunity to come to teach for a summer. And one person came back with amazing stories and experience. And she had been in the south of China in Guangxi province for a summer camp. And then another one or two came to China for a semester to teach in different places, a couple in Langfang and somebody else somewhere else. And they would come back and they would tell these stories. And we were and somebody suggested, well, why don't you take some time and you go and see what you can learn and see on the one hand, what you can learn, and on the other hand, see what you can teach. And there were all these opportunities. I came in 2005, and this was in the few years before the 2008
I was
Olympics.
Gonna say, yeah.
And I didn't come to Beijing. I went to Jiangsu province, city of Huai'an. And people would say, are you going to go to the Olympics? And I'd say, are you kidding? Number one, I'm only here for a year. And number two, I'm not in Beijing. I'm several provinces away. So that was not part of the deal. But what was happening prior to the Olympics, there was already a lot of English education going on in schools. But in addition to that, there was an expansion because China and Chinese people are wonderful hosts. So in order to be a good host, they wanted to have more and more people be able to speak English. So while I was in Jiangsu province, in addition to teaching at the teachers college, and I taught a little bit of primary school and summer camps, and I taught for Jiangsu oil field exploration team. And then when I came to Beijing, I taught Bank of China and Jishuatan Hospital nurses and China Post. And I had other friends who were teaching police officers and taxi drivers. So there was everybody's got to be ready to speak English because we're going to get a lot of visitors and we want to be able to communicate with them. Makes perfect sense. So I came for a year and I was in, as I mentioned, Jiangsu province. It was a teacher's college. Most of the students came from Jiangsu province, and this is in the northern part of the province. Jiangsu is one of the wealthiest provinces in China, and as was noted in Xi Jinping's speech, his report to the 20th Party Congress, he talked about the special role that Jiangsu province was playing in terms of overall development. We were in the northern part of Jiangsu, which at the time was much less developed than the south. All right, although that's changed a bit. And there were two things that confronted me that by the time my year was almost over, I decided, one, it was very nice. I enjoyed it. People were very welcoming. I got to learn a lot. But there were two things that were of great concern to me. Number one, anytime I would mention I was from the United States, people would almost automatically, and with students, it was pretty automatic. They would say, the United States, everybody is rich there. We need to become like the United States. Now, number one, I'm a sociologist. I studied social stratification, right? I understand the fact that everybody in the United States is not rich. I understood it from a theoretical perspective and a historical perspective. But again, I had just spent 30 years working and living in the poorest communities of my country, our country, and I knew it from a first-hand practical experience perspective. And I said, this is a problem.
Yeah.
People think this. And it's particularly a problem that people then want to become like that. All right, so that was problem number one. Sometimes I would ask, why do you think everybody is so rich? And they'd say, so many people have cars. And I would talk about how in San Francisco, the people who cleaned hotel rooms did not make enough money to live in San Francisco, and more, they were living in Fresno, Stockton,
Yeah.
right? And you know what mass transit is like.
That commute.
So
every
therefore,
day,
every
I've done
day,
it. It's terrible.
and therefore, how are you going to get there? You got to have a car. So I was explaining the last car I had was 14 years old when I got it, right? And I was lucky because it ran well. So a car in most places in the United States is not a luxury at all. It's an absolute necessity. So otherwise you don't have work. And if you don't have work, how are you going to live? So people would have to travel long distances, all right, on a daily basis. And even with my car, I am not a religious person, but I would be praying every day that the car doesn't break down, because then you have to deal with the inconvenience and the expense of getting it off the road and getting it repaired, and what do I do while the car is broken, and all of this stuff. So that was problem number one. Number two, I was teaching class. I had 2 classes of third-year English majors, and it was writing, English writing, advanced writing. And I decided to give them an essay. You may be familiar with this. A lot of people are, including a lot of Chinese people. I was surprised. It's an essay by Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher. Comes from his memoirs, written, I don't know, in his 70s or something. I don't know how old he was. And there's this very sharp passage. It's known by a couple of names. One is What I Lived For. And another one is, I can't remember, Love, something, Beauty. And I gave them this, What I Lived For. Less than 1 page. I said, please read this. And then I want you to imagine yourself 50 or 60 years in the future and write what I lived for. And I had 75 students. One of them said, when I was young, disabled people were not treated well. So I committed myself to do something to change that. 2 of them said, there's a terrible gap between income and living conditions between the city and the countryside, and I want to do something to elevate those who are poorer and worse living conditions. And 72 students said, I live to have a good life for me and my family. And I understand that. Everybody wants that. All right? But this was less than 60 years before the founding of the People's Republic of China. And I realized I understand it, but it's a problem because nobody is thinking about anybody else, right? And I can have a good life for me and my family. And sometimes I'll give the example. I got a job. I'm making $100 an hour, and I'm doing great. I think I'm really special. I'm smart. You have no job, right? Some equipment is brought in so that some of my skills can now be done through technology. My boss doesn't want to pay so much money anymore, comes to you. Maybe you're even my friend. Says, how'd you like a job? I'll give you $10 an hour. Now, you don't want to harm me, but you know what? You got a family. You need to take care of your family. So you're going to take it. So I thought I was so special. I'm not special anymore because now you're doing my job and I no longer have a job. So I have to think about you. You have to think about me. We're in this together. Okay? And that's what I was hearing from my students, is that they were in it for themselves only, rather than we will rise together.
Right.
Okay? And after hearing that and realizing about the misunderstanding of the concept of everyone being wealthy in the United States, I realized I have some work to do. And I need to stay in China. And the work I need to do is not really teaching English, but I can use English to teach that. So I decided to stay. And this was a personal a personal struggle because I was planning to go back,
Yeah.
right, to continue what I had been doing for 30 years.
So you
in
transition
the
from
United
one
States.
kind of helping people to another kind of helping people
We can
in
say
another
that,
place.
yeah. And my circumstances of life are obviously completely different. I was a full-time volunteer. Right now, that opportunity isn't here, so I have income, I have a place to live, and so on. But that was the reason that I stayed. That was my purpose for staying, and that is something I continue to do. And while I teach a variety of things, but I always try to incorporate the understanding of those principles that I was talking about into whatever it is I am teaching.
Well, another thing you are doing, and that you've written about in your book, is serving as a bridge between our peoples, the people in the United States where we're from, and the people of China where we've moved to. Could
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about your goal and how you've tried to do so, and maybe how other people can also serve as a bridge between the people of the world?
Okay. As you know, you cannot listen to news programs, particularly from the U.S. or the U.K., or read any publications these days without talking about the evil China. And here are all the terrible things about China. And in the beginning of both this book and a book that I wrote in 2014 called Stories from My Chinese Journey, I tell the story of another sociologist, a friend who passed away last year, who was in China for several years, and he came to Beijing the same time I did. And after he retired, and he used to, every day I would see him, he'd come out of his apartment, we live in the same building, and we'd talk, and he looked so confused. His name was David. And David would say, I don't understand it. I don't understand it. I'm so confused. I read the New York Times online, and it says, this is bad in China, and that is bad in China, and this is bad. And I come out, and I see people laughing, smiling, crying, arguing, eating, playing, all kinds of stuff. He says, it looks nothing like it. He says, it looks more like what I'm familiar with, all right, from other countries. And he had lived in many different countries in the world himself. And so I explained that this is kind of an example, and I figured, well, I have had some amazing opportunities and experience. Some of it had to deal with just teaching, but some of it had to deal with the fact that when I am somewhere, I try not to be on the outside. Right? So when I was still in Jiangsu province, a small city, I helped the Foreign Affairs Office of the city to figure out how can we communicate better, right? Edited things that they had, edited speeches that the mayor was going to gave them, no, this is not a good way to say this. You don't want to say this. Nobody's going to understand it. People are going to think it's confusing, all right? And I did that there, and I continued to do that in various circles. And as I said, I worked with the oil company, and I went and taught first graders on top of my university work and high school students. And I would, I have many students who I met there because I walk around the campus and I see somebody who has an English book, and I go up and say, hi, who are you? I'm Mark. And I'd sit down and talk to them and learn about them, and not only help them communicate in English, but we begin to talk about things that maybe other people wouldn't normally think about. I've been recently, last year I was doing a little bit of online teaching for a law firm, like an hour a week. And we started with different stuff about law, and then I realized, they told me, we don't care about law. We're not particularly interested in dealing with law in our classes. And I would we would take some topic, take something out of the news, and I'd send it to them, and they'd do some research on it. International stuff, Chinese stuff from the United States, and then we'd get together, and each of the students would, some of them attorneys, some of them not attorneys, each of them would do a little presentation about it, and then we'd have a discussion about it, right? So, and I've taught and coached public speaking for many, many years. I taught and coached debate for many years. And then I started writing articles, both in English, both about my experience in China and sometimes the earthquake, right? I wrote an article about that for an English language publication in China. And on top of that, I've written, as you mentioned, it's no longer 70, it's now about 80 songs. 80 songs. And they just tell the stories. And sometimes the stories have a couple of purposes. On the one hand, they tell, and similarly with the book, a lot of times people say, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. Oh, I heard about this thing, but you've given me a new perspective on that, a new way to think about it. And at the same, I had one friend who was teaching in the city of Nantong in Jiangsu province for several years. Another American, he's now back in the United States, but he taught there for several years. And he had gotten a copy of my first book, and he read the book, and he wrote back, and he said, Mark, number one, I think that every foreigner, at least every foreign teacher who comes to China, this should be a required reading for them. But more significant than that statement was him saying, I've always been a very active person trying to do things, help in community, and he had been a restaurant owner and chef, and he would, when there was disasters, he would be out there distributing food from the restaurant and all kinds of stuff. He said, I came to China, and I've been here, and I suddenly realized I've gotten lazy, and I've gotten really focused on myself. And he said, you've reminded me what I need to do. And I visited him. I was invited to give, he helped to arrange for me to give a lecture at his university. And after the lecture, we're walking around the city, and he's talking about how, he said, see that hotel over there? After reading your book, I went to the hotel and said, can I help your staff learn English? And he started doing a lot of other things within the community, both in his campus and the community. All right, he says, not only do I need to do something, but I need to show people that Americans are willing to contribute, not just come here to get something for ourselves, but also to do something to benefit China and benefit those kinds of relations.
So if I could surmise what you've said, giving back to the community as foreigners living in China, in whatever way that we can.
Yes, individuals
would
are
be
different.
a great way to build bridges.
Oh, absolutely. In 2011, one of my first interviews, before there was CGTN, there was CCTV News, and before that there was CCTV 9, which is the foreign language statement. So in 2011, I think it was I've had a number of interviews before that. Most of them were radio. And I'm not sure if I had other TV interviews. But I know in 2011, I had one. It was at least one of the earliest ones on CCTV 9. A CCTV journalist who was, I think he's still with CCTV. At the time, he was fairly high up in the ranks of broadcast journalists here. And he contacted my friend and agent, Fu Han. He had attended a show that we had had. And he contacted her and says, is Mark Levine still in Beijing? And she said, yes. And he said, okay, CCTV 9 is organizing, they're trying to find one American who lives in Beijing. This is 2011. We want to do a little, 4 or 5 minute interview. And so we did that, spent 2 days. But this was right before then President Hu Jintao went to the United States. So we finished the interview. We're going out to dinner with the journalists, and one of the journalists the main interviewer gets off the phone as we're walking to the restaurant, says, okay, here's the plan. on the day that President Hu arrives in the United States, we're going to air this video. We are going to air this video. And what we want you to do is to come to the station to appear on China 24, and which was an evening newscast, and we want you to bring your guitar. And what should I play? Well, just a little bit of, you figure it out. You figure it out. So my agent, Fuhan, who later became my music partner because she plays erhu while I play guitar, is just really brilliant, really brilliant. And she came up with, she says, I know what you have to play. So the song that I played is a Chinese song, and it's called Gan Wen Lu Zai Hafang. And Gan Wen Lu Zai Hafang is from the TV show made from Journey to the West.
Wow.
So there's 2 points of significance here. So one, this was President Hu's journey to the West. And the other is it's dealing with the question of where is the road? And it's, you're on the road, stay on the road. So they showed that they had already been airing it throughout the day, like hourly on different stations, Culture Express, various other shows. They were showing this. But then they showed it again, and then I was interviewed, and the question was, what needs to be done to bridge a gap in understanding and so on? And my response was that whatever the governments can do is good. Whatever businesses can do is good. But my position is that it's the person-to-person contact. Me sitting down with this Chinese person who maybe I don't know or maybe I know, and listening to them, and them listening to me, and us talking and getting to realize, oh, we basically want the same kinds of things. We want people, nobody really wants, well, I don't know that that's true, but nobody, let's just say it, very few people really want someone else to go hungry, all right, to live in terrible circumstances, all right? So, and we need to come to an understanding of that. And the best way to do that is through that individual-to-individual basis. So, yes, I absolutely believe that person-to-person contact,
people-to-people exchanges,
very, very critical. The journalist was, he was thrilled. He says, nobody's ever brought it. We've never had music in here before. What an exciting thing.
Can I ask you about an award that you won? It's a very rare award for foreigners who live in China called Friend of China.
No, it's called the Friendship Award.
Friendship Award.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about that
I don't know
experience?
the number, but I think it's about 2,000 people so far, I think. The process is about, it's about 50 a year, except every 5 years. The years with a 4 and the years with a 9. The 9 is...
longevity or
no,
luck?
Because the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949.
Oh.
So 9 and 4. And it's... and those years, it's 100. So I got it in 2014 when there were 100. And the process is it's used to be issued by the State Administration of Foreign Experts Affairs, which provided the green card, not the green cards, but the work permits and the visas and so on for foreigners, foreign experts who were working here. And then that got subsumed into the Ministry of Science and Technology. So they now issue that award. But people are nominated. Nobody applies. You are nominated, and it's nominated by whatever government body or institution you are employed by that has authorization to be able to employ a foreigner.
Wow.
So that for people at universities, the nomination comes from the the university through starting with the Foreign Affairs Office.
Wow.
So I was nominated, actually I was nominated 3 times before I got it. And it was 9, 10, not in 11, 12, or 13, and then 14 for those times. And finally I received that. And what happens is they narrow selection, and then particular representatives of different government ministries or agencies. So somebody from the Foreign Affairs Office, somebody else from the Ministry of Education, and so on at the national level. And they vote.
Wow.
And if you get a certain number of votes, then you get the award. So I got that, and which was quite a thrill, and very exciting. And the award ceremony takes place right before National Day. And first, everybody goes to the where we were based at the time out of the Foreign Experts Building. You know that, near the Bird's Nest?
No.
Near the Bird's Nest. And it's a hotel, and there's some conference rooms and so on. And we're there, and then we all took a bus to the Great Hall of the People
Wow.
on the 29th, and received the awards, which is a medal and a plaque. And then we went back to the hotel, and then the next day we came back, and there's a big photo session, and the premier gives a speech. Li Keqiang he gave a speech, and then afterwards you go to the banquet, the National Day banquet, with 3,000 other people in the Great Hall of the People.
And the 100 recipients.
And and families, spouses were also allowed. I have no spouse, so I was there by myself.